Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thanks for being here to talk about essential elements that guide therapeutic work with Latino families. I'm Dr. Gabriela Maradiaga Panayotti, and I'm thrilled to be here with my colleague, Dr. Luke Smith, and with the support of El Futuro and NCPAL. We hope to give you a teaser of some elements that may help you support these families in the everyday wonderful work that you do. So to begin, we'd like to introduce ourselves a little bit and talk about why this matters to us and why do we do this important work. Well, for me, I'm an immigrant. I'm an immigrant from Honduras, a pediatrician in Durham County, and I take care of lots of Latino families. I love not just being a bilingual and bicultural provider, but a cultural connector, supporting others like you who want to have more meaningful engagement with these families. And this matters a lot to me. Luke, what about you?
Well, as you can see in this photo, I don't come to this like Gabby does through her own lived experience, though I do have some lived experience through some early experiences in Latin America and the Caribbean in this photo. And it impressed me so much to see communities that were together, but also under a lot of duress. And then experiencing those same communities here in America, in the United States, in our own cities and towns here made me realize that there was something special in our midst. And as a doctor, as a psychiatrist, soon later a child psychiatrist, I found it to be refreshing, but also challenging. And so over the recent years, I've been learning more and more about this. And that's what we want to bring you today is just some distilled concepts about how we work with families and what we can do to empower you as a pediatric provider to do better. So I'll go forward with this and just say some of the things we've observed. One of them is a concept about acculturative stress. Culture, acculturative. So as people come into a new culture, there are certain stresses that impact them. And as you can see in this graphic, there are a number of stressors on our immigrant friends and neighbors who come to us that then cause conditions to develop. And so if the immigrant is a tree, you can see that the winds that blow on this tree of family immigration, discrimination, acculturation, the family economic situation and what's going on at home, or community formation that happens or doesn't happen, and then gangs enter in. These things stress individuals, stress families, and cause things like PTSD, anxiety, depression, substance use. One that's curious there is ADHD. Well, how does that happen? Well, part of it is a mislabeling of diagnoses as well, but it's also seeing people who are stressed and maybe not getting the right supports at school. And so things like ADHD become more significant. And what we do is we rush in with treatments, and that's been our traditional approach. We rush in with therapies, we rush in with medications, and those are partially helpful. And unfortunately, a lot of us have had the experience of offering our best treatments that we learned in medical school and residency and in social work school or wherever, and only to find it really kind of fall flat and wonder, why is that not working? And so some of our colleagues have discovered that there are other forces at work and other supports that we can provide to this tree to help it grow strong. Things like family, really shoring up the family. It's not just the kid in front of me, but it's the whole family system. Just like when I took care of a patient yesterday who was struggling with problems in school and struggling with attitude, and only to find out that her mother had recently separated from her stepfather because of some abuse. And now mother is trying to hold down a job, raise three kids, make appointments, and do all of this stuff. Those things we have to consider when we're taking care of the individual. And you can see others here that are very important to strengthen immigrants. We don't do this alone, do we? We don't do it just in the pediatric practice, but we also do it with specialty providers. I'm a specialty provider and Gabby is a pediatrician. So we work together. But importantly, we also work with the community. The community has tremendous wisdom, tremendous resources that we can partner with, but is always reflective of what we're doing. So we have to think, how are we going to implement practices and treatments that are actually sustained by the community itself? We can't exist in a vacuum. We have to consider the whole. Now we'll walk through some cases. Gabby.
Yeah. And for those of you out there listening who are practitioners and providers in the community who take care of children and are under a time crunch, believe me, I see you. So here is a framework that you can use when you have an encounter like this to guide you in how you may benefit from a slightly adjusted approach, and really focus on those first sessions to build rapport and engagement. Start to be comfortable with the discomfort that you won't necessarily get to the treatment plan you want to at the very beginning, and use that time to be genuinely interested in understanding that patient's perspective in a culturally humble approach. Making sure that you assess and don't assume what systemic and cultural factors may be impacting the family, and then finding ways to align the intervention you would suggest with those families' values. So let's look at the case of Luis and Andrea for how this may be showing up. I'm sure this case has walked into your office many times. A family like this has in mind 7-year-old with many signs and symptoms suggestive of ADHD, and a parent who's worried because of these reports. And in this particular case, the mother, Andrea, feeling frustrated because she can't help with the language barrier, and coming to you for help. How can she help? Because she doesn't really understand the systems in this country. Luke, what about culture? How may culture be showing up for Luis and Andrea?
Well, here are a few ways that we see this, and you can read the slide that we have in front of you. Some things that we'll point out is that Luis is thinking one thing and Andrea is thinking another thing. And you can see that in what we've written here is he may feel like he's in trouble. He feels embarrassed maybe about his family. Maybe he's having feelings of guilt and shame about disappointing his family. And then there's Andrea, who also was feeling some of the very same things. It might be that her family is looking at her and saying, "You're not doing a good job of parenting," or that she starts to blame Luis and say, "He's just not doing the job that I brought him here to do. And I've sacrificed a lot to have him here in school in the US." And so those are some of the things that we may be seeing. And so I wonder what we can do about that. And so the family perspective here that we hear underneath some of these feelings is that they still are a family. They're holding firm to some of these more family orientations. And that's a key point for us to realize and take advantage of when we start to interact with this family, to really emphasize those strengths that they have. And it gets back to those roots, those family roots, is that we understand that they want to help Luis, but they may not know how to, and that this is a new environment. They may have some perceptions of, we handle things here at home, but they also want to find a way to interact with the school. And it's a very difficult place to be for them to feel this kind of torn in two different positions. And so there are some ways we can talk with them.
And so if you're in that position as a provider, this is a common script that isn't necessarily just for families who identify as Latino or Hispanic. That alignment and validation with the caregiver and reflecting back what you're hearing from them. Literally repeating back these words, something like, "I can tell how much you love him and want him to do well." And really pausing and giving some space and time for that family to hear you, understanding them. And then validating the frustration as well, especially with those parents who are really unfamiliar with that system. Again, reflecting back, I can imagine it feels frustrating after trying so many things. And then inquiring about that, being curious, how are you feeling about this? These couple of minutes validating and reflecting will really work to build those strong bonds of trust that the family has. In Spanish, the word confianza. And this means so much because for these families to really buy into any treatment, they really have to feel like they can trust you and that you're looking out for them. And then you start blending those two perspectives between the medical treatment that may be commonplace in this country with the values for this family that they have from home. So again, acknowledging what's important for them and then saying, I have some ways that I can help you and help Luis do better. Would you be interested in hearing them? I'm wondering if there are ways I can share with you, and then seeing how the parent responds there. So to summarize for this initial case, you can see really that there's very little ADHD management there. and that it may be uncomfortable for us in our training to sit with the idea that at the first visit, it's really about building trust and confianza, and that the positive outcome may really just be creating the bonds with the family so that they will return. And that's it, nothing else. And it's okay to spend these visits because in the long run, it may create that buy-in that will lead to the treatment that will support Luis. And I like to call it walking through the mud because it doesn't feel fast or easy, but it's really the only path towards the full support that Luis may need later. All right, so that was one classic case that may come in. Let's move to a second case, another classic one, 14-year-old female for a well child check, first time meeting the family, and you find out during the course of the visit that there is some self-harm happening. Sadly, very common these days. So let's give you a few tips on how you may start to approach these cases. Luke?
Yeah, the orientation we have when we come to an adolescent like Marcela is to think about what some have called a chicken bone being pulled apart, two different spectrums. The child who has come here is loving this American culture, is embracing it, is on the phone, is going to school every day learning English, and perhaps the mom who's at home or the father who's in the workplace or whatever it might be. Those are some stereotypes, obviously, but that's what we're trying to describe is that here's this acculturation with the kid rushing headlong into it and different members of the family being along that spectrum somewhere. And there's a divide that starts to happen. That chicken bone starts to bend and almost break the family because there's such a different pull on one side versus the other. And it really disrupts the family mix. And so what do we do? Well, maybe here's a script for the caregiver as we're talking about this. And this is to be full of this cultural concept of respeto or respect for the family, for the difficulty they're feeling, and for the caregiver's authority in the family, who is well-intentioned but may not quite get it. I can tell that you love your daughter and that this means you want to protect her and keep her from going through things that maybe you went through as a child, and that that's part of the reason why you're worried about this new foreign land that you're in and how she's rushing into it, and you're just trying to be protective and careful. And so maybe that's one frame that we can bring to the mom. And then there's the teen we want to talk to and validate.
And validation for teens and young adults may be something we're familiar with, but in many cultures, this is a new concept, the idea of validating the teen's feelings and desires. We may understand that validation of the young person improves the relationship. It shows validation, the word that we're using, listening, and it really helps that young person open up and understand. But again, this may be challenging for the caregiver for whom this is new. And so you can actually role model this validation for the teen in front of the caregiver as a way to help coach them do similar language at home. For example, it might make sense, Marcella, that you want your parents to give you more freedoms with you because you grew up in this culture and not theirs. And then kind of pausing and letting that sit. And we've shared some of these scripts here with you. And in a future session with more time, we will go over some more scripts and more examples. But we wanted to give you a sense of how some of the friction that you may feel can start to be alleviated by understanding some of these cultural concepts. So in summary, Luke, would you like to review the framework we've discussed today?
Yeah, and so these are some of the highlights of what we're talking about. And that is, yeah, we're bringing you scripts today. We're bringing you some understandings. But the first is just a pause and focus on the relationship. That is key. That's what drives the interaction and then keeps us engaged with this family long term. And that's what we're looking for, is to engage and build this relationship and to be genuinely interested, respectfully interested, very much a listening attitude to listen and understand the perspective that's being brought in. I may have seen a lot of patients in my time, and this may be reminding me of many of the ones I've seen in the past, but let me consider this one with fresh eyes for the first time. And then don't assume that what I've seen before is going on now. Let's listen to it. Let's look at how those cultural understandings in the background are starting to inform the chief complaint or the problem that this person is bringing in before we intervene. And then that shows how we can intervene. And perhaps we're understanding the family rift and we need to include the whole family. And then aligning ourselves with the values of culture, with the family orientation, with the richness and the strength that this family brings in. As much as we may have trouble seeing it, let's understand that there is strength there, and let's align with that, and let's get our treatment so that it's amplified and not just pulling on one side. These are our summary items that we have here for you in this brief time with you today. We'd like to bring you more through the collaboration with NCPAL. There's some wonderful resources being developed, and we're contributing to that. And this is a wonderful community to take care of. And we hope we can help enrich your practice as you go about taking care of Latino families every day. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. See you back soon.